Hello and welcome back to Bacon Pines Part 5. Sorry, it's been like a week or so. Been been doing some tests with some other recording software, and as you can see, wondrous HD at 60 frames. And I think you'll like what this recording software can do. The other one wasn't picking up on.
A speech to end all speeches. Luca awoke to find himself face down in bed. He moaned into his pillow. Why would Gran drug him? Or rather, why was she trying to drug Mr. Nuncreed? Shaking the questions from his woozy head, Luca snapped back to the matter at hand.
The festival. Now, if you've at all dug through the history of this channel's uploads, you'll notice some Forza Horizon. That's where my brain immediately goes when the festival is said. Off we go to festival. Love it, charm. Okay, wonder where on the timeline we could use that one. So, hmm. Hmm.
Augustus Valentine nervously wiped his brow.
Man does not look like he wants to. Looks like he just wants to go. His Johnny.
Gus cleared his throat and awkwardly loosened his tie. William Kerr bounded on the stage with the energy of a preacher at a big tent revival. He gave Gus a hearty slap on the back and motioned him off the stage. Mr. Kerr pulled a thick stack of note cards out from his vest.
Man's got hammer space.
Mr. Kerr took a moment to survey the crowd. He wiped away a single tear. He thumped the podium to emphasize each word. Mr. Kerr nodded confidently, biting his lip. The crowd was silent, in rapt attention. Mr. Kerr methodically made eye contact with each section of the crowd. His voice began to build to a crescendo. The crowd began to look around nervously. Mr. Kerr quickly flicked through his note cards. He raised his hands up to the heavens.
I'm starting to think this whole freezing over thing is a canon
At
event.
that moment, a merciless wall of impossibly cold air ripped through the crowd, instantly freezing everyone and everything it touched. For a man like William Kerr, this was a fitting way for things to end. On a stage, with an entire town frozen in rapt attention for the rest of time. The end.
There's that ice again! Whenever I think we're getting close, it comes along and ruins everything! Maybe we should just quit? Maybe you should just close the book, walk away, and never think of me again!
Do I sense the option to close the book? Arriving shortly?
No, I don't mean that. We got a little closer this time. We just need to try again. Please.
so I can be used right back. Oh, you're kidding. I know this branch in the timeline is important. Has to be. But now, return to this branch.
They'd run the classic good cop, sly cop interrogation. Luca and Rollo ducked behind a barrel, leaving Beck to her task. With a few crisp snaps, she roused Mr. Tolliver. Mr. Tolliver looked down and shifted a bit, testing his restraints. Beck caught herself before letting the surprise manifest on her face. She'd already gotten him to reveal his relation to Gran. This was gonna be easy.
The big questions. Why is it called Operation Sparkplug? Why?
Mr. Tolliver wriggled a bit in his restraints. Beck quickly removed the ropes. Mr. Tolliver rubbed the growing knot on his forehead. Beck twirled her hand, as if to prompt Mr. Tolliver to finish her thought. Beck shook her head and clicked her tongue. Mr. Tolliver let out an amused huff in agreement.
So.
Beck was on a roll now, playing Mr. Tolliver like a fiddle.
Yes. Underground seeds. Very obvious.
Heading for the stairs, Mr. Tolliver hesitated and turned to Beck with a puzzled look. She grinned and gave him a peppy wave. With a shrug, he continued up the stairs, whistling a jaunty tune.
Not information here, Rollo.
Beck blinked slowly in disappointment. She turned to the table and began tearing small scraps of paper. Beck marked each scrap of paper and leaned back.
Anagram. Ben was quick to figure that out.
Luca and Beck looked at Rollo with amazement.
Man would love himself. Love a good ARG. With Ace. Some of the ARGs we got cooking today. You know, good ones. At least.
Gus looked around nervously.
If we don't say anything, come up that video.
Eris's cry hung in the air. Solomon stood proudly at the entrance to the drugstore, holding a brown bag overflowing with black licorice. Solomon shoveled a surprising amount of licorice into his mouth.
Cigars.
Beck cupped her hands on the glass to peek inside.
It's not a foul milk. Keep it.
Beck flung open the door, and they all squeezed in. Luca cracked his knuckles and entered the letters into the keypad. The inside of the phone booth dropped loose from its shell. Without even the space to panic, they closed their eyes, held their breath, and accepted their fate. Suddenly, the chaotic descent slowed to an effortless landing. It was unclear where they ended up, but at least it was solid ground. The air was stagnant and smelled vaguely of chlorine.
Chris is gonna play it off. He was scared the whole time. Mental competence. Go home. She would fall under that. Fertilize it. Where? Now, Mr. Hyperreach. Glue everywhere. With your neutral flux capacitor, a starship phaser, a lightsaber, a TIE fighter.
Rollo's hands hovered over the field of blinking buttons. Joseph waited for a moment in silence. He gestured toward the strange tubes.
Reality. Communications. Life.
Nuncreed let out a growl of a sigh. He shook his head wistfully. Nuncreed took a menacing step towards the children. Luca began to laugh. The color drained from Nuncreed's face.
The yeah, correct. Ace is better than this. Wow.
Nuncreed grabbed Luca by the shoulders. His eyes were frantic. A jolt of realization struck Mr. Nuncreed.
The soul. The source. Just raising up the thing. Just go. Feel like I'm in a bed.
Chapter 8. The Cold, Hard Truth. Beck leapt up, allowing the suction to yank her into the dark. Dimness eclipsed around her like the shutter of a camera as she seemed to cover great distance in mere moments. Her only points of reference were glints of upcoming turns, which approached with frightening speed, only to carom her gracefully along. She heard the tinny, distant echoes of Rollo's glee. Once she stopped fighting against it, the ride was impossibly smooth. Then, all of a sudden, as if minutes had passed in an instant, light blazed into view. A burst of wintry air snuffed across her face as she was flung out into the cold.
I just almost the background. Doing his own thing, thinking aloud.
As they rounded the corner to the frozen town square, they spotted Mr. Nuncreed inching cautiously toward a pit at its center. He held his arms out gingerly, as if approaching a beast in the wild. Upon closing the distance, Luca recognized what Nuncreed was after. Gran stood confidently at the edge, one arm outstretched over the abyss. Nearby, a wheelbarrow had been emptied out. She held a lit torch, which flickered in the bitter wind. Mr. Nuncreed turned back toward the kids, desperation in his eyes. Rollo and Beck held steadfast in awe. Luca approached closer. Mr. Nuncreed spun back toward Gran, his voice growing louder. Mr. Nuncreed winced with anguish. His voice hardened. They both now yelled, not to each other, but at fate itself, making their peace with long-held burdens. The wind howled with encouragement. They menaced at each other, both catching their breath. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Amid a blur of emotions and memories, Luca's mind flooded with questions. The wind calmed, as if to give him the stage. And in the stillness, he began to weep. It was all just too much. Falling to his knees, Luca whimpered softly. The tears crystallized as they hit the snow. Gran stared at Luca for a moment with warm sympathy, remembering why this was all necessary. She stiffened up and brandished the torch at Mr. Nuncreed. Ignoring his final plea, Gran flung the torch into the deep darkness. She smiled and exhaled in relief. Mr. Nuncreed moaned in resignation. The torch echoed as it ricocheted down the hole, punctuated with a thunderous thud. Before Gran could finish, the ground shook her to silence.
Yep. Canon
Gran
event.
only had time to spin around and run to Luca. Her attempt to shield him, an honorable but trifling act. Unflinching love, pitted against an unthinking horror, there was no contest.
Unflinching love.
In an instant, that is where they remain, fixed in place, forever. And so, our story ends on this melancholy scene. In a town brought low by its secrets, sits the frozen statues of a misguided band of meddlers. The end. Well, that was dire. On the bright side, we finally figured out where all the ice is coming from. Now, we just need to find a way to deal with a mystic, unfathomable force of nature.
Fire and ice. My guess is we're gonna have to return to the very beginning if this does not produce another charm.
And in the stillness, he began to hum. After the death of his father, Luca had trouble sleeping. Each night, his mother would sit at the foot of his bed and hum a gentle melody. It was the only thing that could calm his mind. The only thing that, however briefly, could make it all seem okay. That melody pervaded every memory Luca had of his mother. Shivering in the raw snow, he began to hum it out loud. Gran lowered the torch, listening closely. As recognition slowly set in, her heart sank. Those countless nights of consolation, the incomparable loss they shared together. She let the torch fall to the snow and sizzle out. A few steps toward Luca was all she could bear before dropping to the snow herself. Through a flood of tears, she began to hum along, note for note. Lifted his head in astonishment. The last time he heard that melody was the last night he saw his mother. Luca blinked through blurry, watery eyes, trying to see more clearly. He could just make out the impression of a familiar face. He peered across the snowscape at the woman on her knees. Something about her was undeniably his mother, only smaller, older, changed. Luca sprinted as fast as he could toward his mother. They held each other close, and the cold retreated from their bodies. Eleanor looked down at Luca, tightening her embrace in an appeal for forgiveness. Joseph slumped into the cold, wet snow. For the first time in a long time, her voice felt like her own again. Luca gazed down at Nuncreed with pity. He looked small. Joseph stared into the snow, as if searching it for answers. Chapter 9. The Devil You Know. 7 months ago. Eleanor Van Horn crept down the maze of sterile hallways under Perennial Harvest. She stopped in front of the large steel door marked Deep Engineering. No turning back now. She raised a trembling hand. The stolen keycard worked as promised, and the door buzzed open with mechanical efficiency. She was immediately hit with the smell of disinfectant. It was some sort of laboratory. In one corner was a desk covered in papers. Across the room stood a tall metal pod with hoses protruding from its base. She rushed to the desk and began shifting through the piles of papers. They were experiment reports on something called Tempus liquamen. There were dozens of them, every one stamped failed. Eleanor heard the sharp echo of footsteps approaching. She was out of time. Her eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on the strange pod. Muttering a curse under her breath, she dashed over and dove inside. Mr. Kerr addressed the crowd with a sarcastic tone. Whispers filtered through the crowd. Torment dragged on Joseph Nuncreed's face. He paused for a moment, plucking a piece of fuzz from his sweater and discarding it to the ground. Kerr gave a bow of deference. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Solomon pulled a glass vial from his pocket. In one smooth motion, he downed its contents. A triumphant smile grew across Solomon's lips. His body and face began to contort and expand as he disappeared into a belching green mist. A hushed horror gripped the crowd. This is a story about change. Sharper examined his new hands. Sharper choked out a crude squawk of a laugh. Frustrated grumbles sprinkled through the crowd.
Here we go.
William Kerr gave a subtle nod to the clipboards. A helpless quiet settled over the crowd.
Squawk. him? I don't like like man has got a point. Who needs a legacy when you're pretty much immortal?
Sharper addressed the crowd with indignant pride. He'd planned this moment for so long that now, at the deed's fruition, it almost felt frivolous. Mr. Kerr flourished a preposterously elaborate bow.
Patrick C. Montesquieu. Never underestimate what a great man can do, given time.
Sharper coughed up one final laugh and cracked his knuckles. And so, Sharper set about remaking the town in his own image. The fertilizer factory soon reopened for business.
Oh. Whoops. My bad. I guess that is to be expected from a beta feature. I just realized my audio was recording. Not gonna let that get me down at all. Obviously, my mic was recording, and it's like every time I took a screenshot using Steam, that got recorded. coming out state, it looks like.
Sales rose steadily as more and more farmers across the countryside began to swear by its miraculous properties.
Or yeah, I guess it has this. Two-quarter volume to tell. There we go. Hopefully that fixes everything. Yeah.
Beacon Pines became famous. A secretive town that, for the right price, shared its gifts with all. Gifts that became more and more necessary in a world where winters grew longer and longer. The end. This is wrong, but things are becoming clearer now. You can feel it, right? We can't let Sharper win. He might just be the key to this whole thing.
I'm gonna stop after we hit 10.
Let's see.
Finally, time for something new. Next time.
There was a malice lurking behind those eyes, like a trap ready to spring. Luca felt the weight of Nuncrete's hand on his shoulder. Something wasn't right. He didn't know why, but something was telling Luca to get out of there.
Actually, yeah, I think I've had it correctly set this whole time. Oh, fuck now.
Luca twisted free of Nuncrete's grasp.
So, go, guys. The next one.